Et cela doit signifier, said she, quel y aura la dedans and cadeau pour moi, et peut-être pour vous aussi, mademoiselle. Monsieur et parle de vous. Il me demande le nom de ma gouvernante. Et si elle n'était pas une petite personne, aisément said and plus pale. Left alone, I walked to the window, but nothing was to be seen thence. Twilight and snowflakes together thickened the air, and hid the very shrubs on the lawn. I let down the curtain and went back to the fireside. In the clear embers I was tracing a view, not unlike a picture I remembered to have seen of the castle of Heidelberg, on the Rhine, when Mrs. Fairfax came in, breaking up by her entrance the fiery mosaic I had been piecing together, and scattering to some heavy unwelcome thoughts that were beginning to throng on my solitude. Mr. Rochester would be glad if you and your pupil would take tea with him in the drawing-room this evening, said she. He has been so much engaged all day that he could not ask to see you before. When is his tea time? I inquired. Oh, at 6 o'clock. He keeps early hours in the country. You had better change your frock now. I will go with you and fasten it. Here is a candle. Is it necessary to change my frock? Yes, you had better. I always dress for the evening when Mr. Rochester is here. This additional ceremony seemed somewhat stately, however. I repaired to my room, and, with Mrs. Fairfax's aid, replaced my black stuff dress by one of black silk. The best and the only additional one I had. Unused as I was to strangers, it was rather a trial to appear thus formally summoned in Mr. Rochester's presence. I let Mrs. Fairfax precede me into the dining room, and kept in her shade as we crossed that apartment and, passing the arch, whose curtain was now dropped, entered the elegant recess beyond. 2 wax candles stood lighted on the table, and 2 on the mantelpiece. Basking in the light and heat of a superb fire, lay Violet. Adele knelt near him. Half reclined on a couch appeared Mr. Rochester, his foot supported by the cushion. He was looking at Adele and the dog. The fire shone full on his face. I knew my traveler with his broad and jetty eyebrows, his square forehead, made squarer by the horizontal sweep of his black hair. I recognized his decisive nose, more remarkable for character than beauty. Mr. Rochester must have been aware of the entrance of Mrs. Fairfax and myself, but it appeared he was not in the mood to notice us, for he never lifted his head as we approached. Here is Miss Eyre, sir, said Mrs. Fairfax. In her quiet way, he bowed, still not taking his eyes from the group of the dog and child. Let Miss Eyre be seated, said he, and there was something in the forced stiff bow, in the impatient yet formal tone, which seemed further to express, what the deuce is it to me whether Miss Eyre be there or not? At this moment I am not disposed to accost her. Besides, the eccentricity of the proceeding was piquant. I felt interested to see how he would go on. Then she commended his patience and perseverance in going through with it. Madam, I should like some tea, was the sole rejoinder she got. She hastened to ring the bell, and when the tray came, she proceeded to range the cups, spoons, etc., with assiduous celerity. I and Adele went to the table, but the master did not leave his couch. Will you hand Mr. Rochester's cup? Said Mrs. Fairfax to me. Adele might perhaps spell it. Did you expect a present? Miss Eyre, are you fond of presents? And he searched my face with eyes that I saw were dark, irate, and piercing. I hardly know, sir. I have little experience of them. They are generally thought pleasant things. Generally thought. But what do you think? I should be obliged to take time, sir, before I could give you an answer worthy of your acceptance. A present has many faces to it, has it not? And one should consider all before pronouncing an opinion as to its nature. Miss Eyre, you are not so unsophisticated as Adele. She demands a cadeau clamorously. The moment she sees me, you beat about the bush. Oh, don't fall back on over-modesty. I have examined Adele, and find you have taken great pains with her. She is not bright. She has no talents. Yet in a short time she has made much improvement. Sir, you have now given me my cadeau. I am obliged to you. It is the meat teacher's most covet praise of their pupil's progress. Humph, said Mr. Rochester, and he took his tea in silence. You have been resident in my house 3 months. Yes, sir. And you came from? A charitable concern. How long were you there? 8 years. 8 years. You must be tenacious of life. I thought half the time in such a place would have done up any constitution. Who are your parents? I have none, nor ever had, I suppose. Do you remember them? No, I thought not. And so you were waiting for your people when you sat on that stile. For whom, sir? For the men in green. It was a proper moonlight evening for them. Did I break through one of your rings, that you spread that damned ice on the causeway? I shook my head. The men in green all forsake England 100 years ago, said I, speaking as seriously as he had done. And not even in Hay Lane, or the fields about it, could you find a trace of them. I don't think either summer, or harvest, or winter moon will ever shine on their revels more. Mrs. Fairfax had dropped her knitting, and, with raised eyebrows, seemed wondering what sort of talk this was. Well, resumed Mr. Rochester, if you disown parents, you must have some sort of kinsfolk, uncles and aunts. No, none that I ever saw. And your home? I have none. Where do your brothers and sisters live? I have no brothers or sisters. Who recommended you to come here? I advertised, and Mrs. Fairfax answered my advertisement. Yes, said the good lady, who now knew what ground we were upon, and I am daily thankful for the choice Providence led me to make. Miss Eyre has been an invaluable companion to me, and a kind and careful teacher to Adele. Don't trouble yourself to give her a character, returned Mr. Rochester. Eulogiums will not bias me. I shall judge for myself. She began by felling my horse, sir, said Mrs. Fairfax. I have to thank her for this sprain. The widow looked bewildered. Miss Eyre, have you ever lived in a town? No, sir. Have you seen much society? None but the pupils and teachers of Lowood, and now the inmates of Thornfield. Have you read much? Only such books as came in my way. And they have not been numerous, or very learned. Oh, no. You are very cool. No. What? A novice not worship her priest. That sounds blasphemous. I disliked Mr. Brocklehurst, and I was not alone in the feeling. He is a harsh man, at once pompous and meddling. He cut off our hair, and for economy's sake bought us fat needles and thread, with which we could hardly sew. That was very false economy, remarked Mrs. Fairfax, who now again caught the drift of the dialogue. And was that the head and front of his offending? Demanded Mr. Rochester. He starved us when he had the sole superintendence of the provision department, before the committee was appointed, and he bored us with long lectures once a week, and with evening readings from books of his own inditing, about sudden deaths and judgments, which made us afraid to go to bed. What age were you when you went to Lowood? About 10. And now what did you learn at Lowood? Can you play? A little. Of course, that is the established answer. Go into the library. I mean, if you please excuse my tone of command, I am used to say, do this, and it is done. I cannot alter my customary habits for one new inmate. Go, then, into the library. Take a candle with you. Leave the door open. Sit down to the piano, and play a tune. I departed, obeying his directions. Enough. He called out in a few minutes. You play a little, I see, like any other English schoolgirl, perhaps rather better than some, but not well. I closed the piano and returned. Mr. Rochester continued. Adele showed me some sketches this morning, which she said were yours. I don't know whether they were entirely of your doing. Probably a master aided you. No, indeed, I interjected. That pricks pride. Well, fetch me your portfolio, if you can vouch for its contents being original, but don't pass your word unless you are certain I can recognize patchwork. Then I will say nothing, and you shall judge for yourself, sir. I brought the portfolio from the library. Approach the table, said he, and I wheeled it to his couch. Adele and Mrs. Fairfax drew near to see the pictures. No crowding, said Mr. Rochester. Take the drawings from my hand as I finish with them, but don't push your faces up to mine. He deliberately scrutinized each sketch and painting. 3 he laid aside. The others, when he had examined them, he swept from him. Take them off to the other table, Mrs. Fairfax, said he, and look at them with Adele. You glancing at me, resume your seat, and answer my questions. I perceive those pictures were done by one hand. Was that hand yours? Yes. And when did you find time to do them? They have taken much time and some thought. I did them in the last 2 vacations I spent at Lowood, when I had no other occupation. Where did you get your copies? Out of my head. That head I see now on your shoulders. Yes, sir. Has it other furniture of the same kind within? I should think it may have, I should hope. Better. He spread the pictures before him, and again surveyed them alternately. While he is so occupied, I will tell you, reader, what they are. And first, I must premise that they are nothing wonderful. The subjects had, indeed, risen vividly on my mind. As I saw them with the spiritual eye, before I attempted to embody them, they were striking, but my hand would not second my fancy. And in each case, it had wrought out but a pale portrait of the thing I had conceived. These pictures were in watercolors. The first represented clouds, low and livid, rolling over a swollen sea. All the distance was an eclipse. So, too, was the foreground, or rather, the nearest billows, for there was no land. One gleam of light lifted into relief a half-submerged mast, on which sat a cormorant, dark and large, with wings flecked with foam. Its beak held a gold bracelet set with gems, that I had touched with as brilliant tints as my palette could yield, and as glittering distinctness as my pencil could impart. Sinking below the bird-hand mast, a drowned corpse glanced through the green water. A fair arm was the only limb clearly visible, whence the bracelet had been washed or torn. The dim forehead was crowned with a star. The lineaments below were seen as through the suffusion of vapor. The eyes shone dark and wild, the hair streamed shadowy, like a beamless cloud torn by storm or by electric travail. Throwing these into distance, rose, in the foreground, a head, a colossal head, inclined towards the iceberg, and resting against it, 2 thin hands, joined under the forehead, and supporting it. This pale crescent was the likeness of a kingly crown. What it diademed was the shape which shape had none. "Were you happy when you painted these pictures?" asked Mr. Rochester presently. "I was absorbed, sir. Yes, and I was happy to paint them. In short, was to enjoy one of the keenest pleasures I have ever known. That is not saying much. Your pleasures, by your own account, have been few, but I dare say you did exist. In a kind of artist's dreamland while you blent and arranged these strange tints? Did you sit at them long each day?" In each case I had imagined something which I was quite powerless to realize. How could you make them look so clear, and yet not at all brilliant, for the planet above quells their rays? And what meaning is that in their solemn depth? And who taught you to paint wind? There is a high gale in that sky, and on this hilltop. Where did you see Latmus? For that is Latmus. There, put the drawings away. I had scarce tied the strings of the portfolio, when, looking at his watch, he said abruptly, "It is 9 o'clock. What are you about, Miss Eyre, to let Adele sit up so long? Take her to bed." Mrs. Fairfax folded up her knitting. I took my portfolio. We curtsied to him, received a frigid bow in return, and so withdrew. "You said Mr. Rochester was not strikingly peculiar, Mrs. Fairfax," I observed, when I rejoined her in her room, after putting Adele to bed. "Well, is he?" "I think so. He is very changeful and abrupt." "True. No doubt he may appear so to a stranger, but I am so accustomed to his manner, I never think of it. And then, if he has peculiarities of temper, allowance should be made. Why, partly because it is his nature, and we can none of us help our nature, and partly because he has painful thoughts, no doubt, to harass him, and make his spirits unequal. What about family troubles? For one thing. But he has no family. Not now, but he has had. Or, at least, relatives. He lost his elder brother a few years since. His elder brother. Yes. The present Mr. Rochester has not been very long in possession of the property. Only about 9 years. 9 years is a tolerable time. Was he so very fond of his brother as to be still inconsolable for his loss? Why, no, perhaps not. But his spirit could not brook what he had to suffer in it. He is not very forgiving. He broke with his family, and now for many years he has led an unsettled kind of life. I don't think he has ever been resident at Thornfield for a fortnight together, since the death of his brother without a will left him master of the estate, and indeed, no wonder he shuns the old place. Why should he shun it? Perhaps he thinks it gloomy. The answer was evasive. I should have liked something clearer, but Mrs. Fairfax either could not, or would not, give me more explicit information of the origin and nature of Mr. Rochester's trials. She averred they were a mystery to herself, and that what she knew was chiefly from conjecture. It was evident, indeed, that she wished me to drop the subject, which I did accordingly.
Alright, this story has come to an end. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. Thank you.